Do older people require extra safety measures in class? That's a question. Firstly, age is not the problem. We have many old people who are able and take part in events, run marathons and do lots of super things in terms of their movement. We have younger people who are not as capable. So I want us to stop thinking about age as being the problem, but really the problem is more, how does a client present to you? Now, we know that as we age, there are natural declines in our anatomical structure, our nervous system, our physiology, our bones, our muscles. With that natural decline, we have to consider the impact of that on your client's movement. For instance, postmenopausal women we know suffer from osteopenia, and that can lead to some loss of bone mineral density. We know as the nervous system declines that might cause us some movement problems. So the question to ask yourself as a teacher when considering older adults and the safety is, how are my older adults presenting in terms of their ability to take part in the class, and do they have any conditions that will affect that movement? In lots of ways, the same consideration we would give anybody at any age. So what are the risks for older people? There are many risks depending on the condition. Two I want to focus on a little bit, which are more common, is the bone mineral density loss, which may cause the risk of fracture and the risk of falling if they've lost balance, coordination, muscle strength, mobility. So when we consider those two as quite big risks in a class, we need to consider the repertoire or the exercises that we use within class that may increase that risk by them taking part. So how do we manage the balance of the risk and the fear of the risk for our older clients? We want to be really communicative and explain to clients thoroughly everything that we're going to do in the class. We want to give them time to absorb the information. We want to give them confidence in our instruction and confidence in our knowledge. What we want to do is give them time to change between one exercise and another. We want to ensure that exercises are executed in a stable position, that we give them wide bases for standing exercises, that we give them support for things like balance exercises, that we give them time to turn between one position and another. And at the same time, we want to challenge the areas of loss by incorporating some work that involves balance and movement between positions. So it's balancing that, challenging it by putting that work in, but giving them confidence that we've also allowed time and support for that work to happen. Living with a condition may affect our ability to participate in a group exercise class. So how do we manage that as teachers? Let me take one specific example of a hip replacement. If somebody's had osteoarthritis in the hip, or has osteoarthritis of the hip, or had a recent operation with a hip replacement, they may not be confident in getting up and down to the floor, and they may not be able to lie on the hip, or they may not be able to do some of the movements that take the hip into flexion or extension. So what we need to do as teachers is adapt our classes to incorporate movements that either give them assistance and support to move up and down to the floor, like backward chaining through a chair, holding onto a chair, going back into a lunge, getting down to the floor gradually, turning onto your side, backward chaining that movement. Maybe offering support like a cushion to put under the hip when we lie on the hip. They may also experience sensory declines or neural declines. Sensory declines may affect things like their hearing. So understanding to change our pitch in teaching, maybe not having music at a certain level because that affects their hearing of the instruction. And just giving people more time to change position if they have neural declines. How do we get to know some of these things about our older clients as group exercise teachers? It can be quite challenging. Firstly, we quite often only get a chance to speak to clients for about 2 minutes at the beginning of a class. So it's really important that we do a verbal screening, asking people if there's any information that we ought to know about. Then taking opportunity through the class to observe whether movement is a challenge for some of our clients and really absorbing that information. And then perhaps as we move around the class, asking more specific questions to your clients about why or what they can or cannot do. The people who know the best is the client themselves. So the more opportunity we give ourselves to talk to the client and understand what they can and cannot do, the more informed we become as teachers and the safer a class we can make for older adults. Let's look at some do's and don'ts. Let's look at the do's. Let's be inclusive and communicative with our older clients. To be inclusive, we need to talk to them about their conditions and create an environment in which they feel able to share the information. We need to ensure we have sufficient support for their movement, be that a wall available, be it a bar, be it a chair, that at all times we can offer them support in the class. Another consideration is creating social time in our class, not rushing everything. Many older adults may have experienced loss in their lives of family members, colleagues, friends as they've aged. It's particularly important, especially if the reason that they've come along to class is to gain that social contact, to allow time between the exercises for them to talk to each other, talk to you and socialise together, and maybe allowing a little bit of time at the end of your class to have a drink together and a chat and a sit down together. What we don't want to do is focus our class on high impact, high intensity performance and achievement. We want to focus our class on functional movement and functional ability for everyday life. Everybody wants to perform well, but for the older population who are particularly suffering from long-term conditions, it's important that we keep everyday movement as active as we possibly can. This will involve some high-impact work, some intensity work, some movement work, but we don't want it to be the focus, and we want to do it in a way that feels achievable for the older adult. So we want to consider things like not over repeating exercises, not overloading exercises, ensuring exercises have stable bases so that if we're standing, that the feet are wider apart, that also they can support each other by holding on to each other, working in pairs, or perhaps working with a bar or a chair. If you want to find out more about working with older people or long-term conditions, contact EMD UK, your national governing body for group exercise.